annual conference, which has been organized on a virtual platform this year. Last year, all together in Dhaka, and it was a pleasure meeting with you there physically, and it is actually a pleasure even to revive this connection virtually going forward. A very warm welcome and greetings to all. We have colleagues from Bangladesh and Iran. A very warm, special thank you to them for joining on the Prophet Muhammad's birthday. I know it is a holiday in some of the countries, like it is a holiday today. And thank you, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, for joining here. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. Please keep your speakers on mute when you're not speaking, and unmute yourself when you speak. That's the only housekeeping announcement I'd like to make. With these words, it's extremely a pleasure to have Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, President FICCI, with us this morning or this afternoon. May I now invite Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, President FICCI, to deliver welcome remarks. Dr. Sangeeta Reddy.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and namaste to everyone who's here. It is indeed my pleasure on behalf of FICCI to welcome all of you to the 34th Khaki conference, which is being held virtually. I believe and I hope that all your families are well, staying safe in these difficult times, and that all of us have found the resilience to fight this battle. I think that when COVID-19 hit us, like the rest of the world, India has been forced to innovate, to re-strategize, to build new skills and strengths, and to look forward with a renewed focus on health and humanity. And in the very same breath, the existential necessity of strong business and economy was highlighted 100 times over while debating lockdowns, disruptions in business. And despite these, we did see contractions in GDP, contraction in balance sheet, overall a slowing down. But I think that all of us have come to the resolve that the world can, should, and will find a way to emerge stronger from this crisis. So I would like to welcome all of you for this conference. I was extremely happy just pre-conference to see the camaraderie and the bonhomie among members who are here today. You all know each other, you've built up relationships. This being your 34th conference, I think we can evolve a collective vision. May I especially take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman Niti Aayog, Government of India, to this special program and conference. Dr. Rajiv, thank you so much for joining us. We are extremely proud of the tremendous role that you and Niti Aayog have been playing in spearheading Indian policy formulation. And under Dr. Rajiv's dynamic leadership, he has found this extremely unique way to translate thought process into action on the ground by effective collaboration between industry and governments. We are truly grateful for his insights on multiple subjects, his deep knowledge on the economy, but also a sensitivity and an appreciation to all sectors of people. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, we know that you've played a pivotal role in the government's tireless efforts on the twin goals of protecting lives of the Indian citizens, protecting livelihoods, finding ways to bring back the economy. And I think that India has indeed done a tremendous job. I'm sure people from all over the world would be happy to hear these views. I'd like to welcome Mr. Samir Modi, the president of Khaki. This is your conference, but since FICCI is playing this role, it's also my pleasure and privilege to be welcoming you. And thank you for all the endeavors that you've been leading along with the members. I extend my warm welcome to everybody else, and I'm grateful for this very vibrant panel. I think as geopolitical environments shift and disruptions in supply chain bring home to us the extensive change which is happening across the world, but also in every home. And these changes bring new opportunities, new hopes of friendship, of growth, of collaboration, of innovation, and building a new multilateral, environment-friendly, sustainable economy. Very briefly, I will share a few points, not the entire thing, of some highlights of India. I just want to reiterate the fact that while India first went into one of the strictest lockdowns ever in the world, it gave us the opportunity to ramp up our healthcare capabilities, to organize policy, to enhance testing, and to bring a powerful collaboration between the medical and public at large. Because as we have often now begun to say, because we're realizing that health is not just the responsibility of the healthcare system. It's not just the responsibility of the government. And it is not just the responsibility of individuals as well. It is a collective societal responsibility. From a simple thing like wearing masks, we realized that even if an individual is careful and the government has created all the infrastructure and the private sector has stepped up, if society does not play its role in containing the spread of the disease, we are collectively at risk. And therefore, I don't think at any time in the world has healthcare ever been so center stage, so important. And I believe that post this pandemic, we will all come out stronger because we will focus on strengthening the healthcare system and think not from creating mere sick care infrastructure, but unified health and wellness and preventive healthcare societal chains. And this will, I think, herald a new era in the overall health of the world. In terms of the economy, the government has done a significant role, and I think I would leave this to Dr. Rajiv Kumar to really speak more about. But we must commend multiple macroeconomic policy, the significant economic package which looked at fiscal and non-fiscal initiatives, which amounted to, in terms of benefit, almost 10.3% of GDP. And all policy statements from the government continue to say that there will be more fiscal stimulus as and when required. And the commitment to re-energize the economy and stay on the track of creating a $5 trillion economy was articulated only yesterday by the Honorable Prime Minister. I think there is a big potential for global trade. There is a strengthening of the Indian manufacturing capability, but there is equally a concept of building at scale in India for the world. India invites, with its new very business-friendly policy, global partners to come into India and manufacture here. The new national infrastructure pipeline, which entails an investment of over $1 trillion between now and 2025, also presents an ambitious plan with a good mix of public and private funding. There are multiple other things that we could speak about, but I think we have a tremendous lineup of speakers. I want to end by welcoming all of you and saying that while we're having today's virtual conference, we look forward to welcoming you in India. FICCI's doors and our offices and our teams and our intellectual capacity will be open to support any of you in your forays into this country. And I commend this global initiative because ultimately it is only with all of us coming together that we can build an inclusive, sustainable society for ourselves and our future generations. So all the very best and welcome. Namaste.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, for those welcome remarks. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Samir Modi, President CASI and Executive Director Modi Enterprises, for his opening remarks. We don't need to introduce Samir to all of you, but I think I'll just invite him to address us going forward. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Modi.
Mr. Modi, I just want to, I'm so sorry, one line is that I would like to remember and honor your founder, Chairman, Mr. K.K. Modi, who is really instrumental in creating this organization. So I think it's a good time for all of us to remember him. Over to you, Mr. Modi.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. I think my father has been instrumental in things, CASI especially, and he's played a great role in CASI and FICCI. And he was, I think, a great man, and we miss him very dearly. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to you, those who are in the Asian countries. Good morning, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Niti Aayog Vice Chairman, Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, FICCI President, officers and members of CASI, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Confederation of Asia Pacific Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I am pleased to welcome all of you to the 34th virtual CASI conference. As you know, holding this year's conference in an online format had been necessitated by the ongoing COVID-19 situation. Indeed, the pandemic is having a massive impact not only on daily lives, but also on our businesses. Many organizations are currently scrambling as they re-strategize, cancel events, meetings, and other activities on which they rely to bring members together. CASI has similarly been affected by the pandemic, with several planned gatherings, programs, events indefinitely postponed until the health crisis declared as safely over. Our day-to-day activities needed to be rethought on a regular basis to deal with the changes and challenges caused by the health crisis. Hence, it is because of the safety issues surrounding the pandemic that we had decided to hold this year's conference virtually. As I'm sure you'll agree, this is the safest way to can bring members and colleagues, invited speakers, and other stakeholders together during this period. I would therefore like to once again convey my gratitude to all of you for attending today's online conference. Your kind presence certainly shows your commitment to our club and what it stands for, and this we deeply appreciate. Let me also thank the conference speakers who generously agreed to share with us their knowledge and expertise on issues of current concern to the business community. I'm sure the insightful inputs will create value to our discussions. Focusing on the theme achieving sustainable growth in a turbulent and disruptive global market, today's virtual conference will examine current developments, challenges, and disruptions in the regional and world market environment and the geopolitical landscape and how these impact on the economies and business operations of the region. I invited speakers to share their views and perspectives on how the Asian economies are being shaped by the COVID-19 containment measures and beyond, the challenge of restoring the multilateral trading system, China-US trade friction and its impact on the global economy. I'm confident that we'll have an interesting and productive exchange of views on these important issues. It is my ardent wish that the valuable insights from our speakers, the deliberation that will take place during today's conference, will be a great learning experience from all of us. Thank you, and may we all have a fruitful and productive conference. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, President Kasi, Mr. Sabir Modi, for your remarks, and also for always giving FICCI the opportunity to collaborate with Kasi for meaningful discussions and initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to one of the highlights of the annual conference. It is an absolute honor for me to welcome Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog, Government of India, to deliver the keynote address. Dr. Rajiv Kumar joined Niti Aayog in September 2017. Before his present appointment, he was the founding director of Fair India Foundation in New Delhi, Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute for Economics and Politics in Pune. He has served on the Government of India nominated director of the Central Board of Reserve Bank of India, the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and Asia, ERIA in Jakarta, the Central Board of State Bank of India, Mumbai, the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, and the member of the National Security Advisory Board and member of the Economics for the Telecom Regulatory Authority of New Delhi. We are proud privilege of having him serve as the Secretary General of FICCI prior to that. And it's indeed to welcome Dr. Rajiv Kumar for his keynote address today. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dilip. And what a pleasure it is to come back to Kaki conference. Let me first start off by felicitating the Kaki for the 34th conference that you're holding. It's a landmark, it's a milestone that you achieved. It's a real pleasure for me to be with Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, Mr. Samir Modi, and all the rest of the eminences from other countries and the experts and speakers. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. And I hope and that we will have a very fruitful discussion during this conference, and that Kaki will go from strength to strength as we go forward. As Dilip mentioned, I have been the Secretary General of FICCI, so it's like a homecoming for me, and therefore, once more, thanks for the opportunity to be speaking at this prestigious conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to start off by saying that yes, we are of course living in very turbulent times. The pandemic has upended all our plans, and we need to think of a new normal. But we should not also forget that Asia Pacific has the resilience and has the resources and the diversity and the scale and the innovativeness to continue to remain the driver of global growth going forward. I think that's something that we need to take note of, because that's something which should be driving our agenda as we go forward, which is that whatever come what may, whether it's Industry 4.0 or artificial intelligence or or this pandemic and the way to get over it, etc., I do not think that there is a replacement of the Asia Pacific region as the principal driver of growth going forward. Because if you just look at the composition of Asia Pacific, and for me, I start off by including it from the east of Suez Canal to the west of Fiji. It's a region which is so rich in every possible way and so innovative and so on top of everything that we will remain, the drivers of global growth. And I say this simply to underline the importance of an organization like Kaki. I mean, I think it is important for us to build these relationships across our countries and within the region, and to think of and to make this region much more connected, far more interrelated, as it were, and reduce some of the ignorance that we have in one part of the region vis-a-vis the other parts of the region. I think that it's important for us as we go forward that we build platforms which will bring entrepreneurs from all the entire region together, and not just entrepreneurs, but also governments and other organizations, so that we can chart a course which will be, which will lead the way in achieving more sustainable, more inclusive, and more rapid growth, even in the post-COVID world. So, just to say that I look forward to the conferences in the future, and I welcome all the members to this conference being hosted here. It's clear, that not just the COVID pandemic, but also, what was happening on the technology front, the onset of artificial intelligence, the robotics, the reshoring, the deep machine learning, the threat for human employment by machines, which is becoming real. I commend to you all, and I was myself hugely impressed by the book of AI Superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee, who is saying that for the first time ever, there is a technology revolution on our hands, whereby enough jobs may not be created to compare to those which may be lost. So we need to bring in another aspect in our thinking on the economy, and which is empathy, and which is not just the triple but even the quadruple bottom line that we talk about. And I think the new normal, the post-COVID new normal, because of this acute need to achieve the balance between lives and livelihoods, must tell us that we need to now rethink the whole concept of, in some sense, capitalism, regional cooperation and technology transfer, so that we can take care of those who will be affected not just by COVID, but by also the technological changes that are upon us. I'm told that there's a massive consolidation going on at the moment in Europe and in North America. Consolidation in terms of, large-scale closures, mergers, the emergence of even more powerful corporates, which will have power, which will have influence and power unimaginable in the past. All that is probably true and probably very good, but at the same time, we need to make sure that when that happens, those who are left out of that, those which are at the bottom of the pyramid, or as we in India call them, at the Antyodaya, the end of the queue, cannot be left behind. And I think this came very clear in our experience of the COVID, because in our attempt to achieve this balance between lives and livelihoods, we realized the huge importance of the social sectors, which in many ways some of us have left behind, have not paid enough attention in the past. The percentage of our GDP that is devoted to health, that is devoted to education, that is devoted to nourishment, that is devoted to child and women welfare. I think COVID acted like a low tide, which made us look rather vulnerable across all countries, across many countries, because of what we had not been able to do so far. And I think it has rung those alarm bells that we do not pay enough attention to the social sector at our own peril, as it were. So I think the new normal must be going forward that the human resource, the social, the human, health, its welfare, its education, its awareness would become middle and central of our growth. In fact, it might well be a very good idea for Kaki to decide whether they would want to reduce, they would want to replace the traditional measurement of growth as GDP by some measure which involves more, a bigger chunk of human welfare, of human, sort of well-being, as it were. And what would that be called? I'm not sure. But nonetheless, I think it's time to emphasize much more the social aspects of our growth and of our development than maybe what we have done in the past. And I think that's one of the singular lessons that, as far as I'm concerned, COVID has taught me. And for example, one of my primary priorities at the moment is nourishment, is child and women nourishment, is the education of the younger folks, and women empowerment, because these are something that Niti Aayog has been pushing and will be pushing much more in the future, because we do not want to be in a situation where, because of technology and now because of any such pandemic, we are caught in a situation where lives, are affected. I think the social security net that we need is got to be strengthened, and this is why you've seen a lot of announcements which are trying to formalize the labor force in our country, which are trying to reduce the distance between the formal and the informal sector, whether it is reaching electricity to all the households, whether it is talking about water in every tap in every household, whether it is the Saubhagya scheme, which is making available clean cooking fuel to 120 million women in this country, the 450 million odd bank accounts for financial inclusion that have been opened. We need to reduce, if not eliminate, the distance, the dualism in all our countries between the formal and the informal sector. Because I think, and in India, this is very often talked in terms of Bharat versus India. I think the COVID has shown us that we need to take all that is good in India to Bharat, and all that's natural and sustainable from Bharat into India, and reduce this duality that we're talking about. So that's one, I wanted to emphasize this, because I think very often we in the government and in the private sector forget that there is a human aspect to all of this, and that's to be taken care of and should not be reduced in numbers, whether that's of growth or whatever. The second major implication that I think we have is on environment. And I think this is where, this is again, and you have very rightly in this conference chosen that as the focus. And therefore, again, here, we must recognize that Asia Pacific does not have the luxury of retrofitting as Europe and North America or South America did. We cannot go about business as usual, and finance our growth at the cost of the natural capital. I remember a colleague, and I think a professor now in Delhi University, would always talk about the natural capital being included as a part of the calculation of GDP. How much of the natural capital have we destroyed in achieving a 1% rate of growth is something that we need to think about. And I think this is because as I said, we have only one planet to live in. That's a given. We are at the cusp of an emergency. That's also very clear. Whether it's in water, or it's in air pollution, or it's in or the carbon content in the atmosphere, we just simply cannot afford to ignore it at all. And I think, therefore, what I would recommend very strongly to CACI and all its members is that we must now, in our estimate of our own success, include not just financial profits, but also the social profit, the natural capital, and in some sense, the fourth, which is the bottom of the pyramid as to how we go forward. Now, in our country, for Niti Aayog, we have taken a slightly different approach towards sustainability, because that the Honorable Prime Minister has declared a target of 450 gigawatts of renewable power by 2030, and we want to increase its share, almost double or triple its share, and we now have a very important aspect of taking the bids, not which is renewable, but including the storage. So that's on the energy side, and then we are pushing, as you know very well, the electric mobility in a very strong way, and the electric mobility mission is in Niti Aayog. And yesterday, for example, we finalized the standards for charging for 2- and 3-wheelers, which are 85% of the vehicles on the street, and we want to shift them as quickly as possible to electric mobility as we go forward. All of this is important, but I think we sometimes, and especially in an industrial body like ours, miss the importance of agriculture as a source of sustainable environment. We know that agriculture today is a major contributor of methane and carbon in the climate, and we need to reverse that, and we can today. And this is where Niti Aayog has been pushing very heavily on agroecology and on natural farming, which is chemical-free farming, and which is chemical-free farming that can be adopted by small and marginal farmers. And the amazing thing is, and I just had a 2-day international webinar with more than 600 participants from FAO, from ICRA, from UNEP, and from the Government of India, the Minister of Agriculture, all participated. We can have agriculture which is zero chemical fertilizers, zero pesticides, zero weedicide, and yet and 1/10 the amount of water that we use, and yet retain and maintain the yields that the farmers want. This is in pursuit of our Prime Minister's call for doubling farmers' income, and not just focus only on the output in agriculture, because you can double farmers' income much better if you reduce the costs of farming and also reduce the risks, rather than only focus on output and the expansion and output. But lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, the best thing that this form of agriculture does is that it sequesters carbon from the atmosphere into the soil. And now there are results from 10 agriculture universities and one and from Andhra Pradesh, where there are 2.2 million farmers now practicing this. In this country, there are more than 5 million who are practicing this successfully. And there are now hard data that shows that the content of organic carbon in the soil increases significantly with the use of this form of agriculture. And this is, it creates the humus. It also not just increases the carbon, but also enables the plants to fix moisture from the air, which means that you can also reduce the groundwater utilization that you have that you go forward. I say these things too because I thought this is will give you a slightly different focus on what you can do going forward. The third point that I did want to make, and I think which is something as a vice chairman I need to do, is that the government of India has used this crisis as an opportunity to lay the foundations for much stronger growth going forward. We have never been busier in our work. We have actually taken up one sector after the other and taken up the most difficult issues and problems and tried to resolve them. Whether it's labor, we rationalized the labor laws, 29 of them are central, 200 of them are states, and put them all together in 4 codes and given the flexibility to entrepreneurs. We have done this work for our agricultural sector. We have liberated our farmers for selling any way they like. We hope that there will therefore be much bigger investment in agriculture because now that the government has moved out in a way. Just recently, we allowed contract farming. We have allowed contract labor. We have liberalized the FDI regime so that you can get 100% FDI. I can go on. I think it'll be a long list. Let me just summarize it by saying that this government is committed to 2 things. One, to give much greater space to private entrepreneur, because we know that without private entrepreneur, whether domestic or foreign, we will not be able to achieve the kind of growth rates and sustainable growth rates that we want. And for this end, our biggest effort is to create the trust between the government and the private sector, on the basis of which we can work together in a public-private partnership to take matters forward. And the second one that I did want to emphasize is that we know that we will pursue self-reliance. We will want to give our domestic entrepreneurs the best situations, the best possibility environment to go forward. We will, while attracting FDI, also repose our faith and trust in those who have already invested in India. And we want to recognize them by giving them much better logistics, much better infrastructure, and much better, more flexibility, whether it's in the use of land or labor. And for this reason, we have brought out what is called the production-linked incentive scheme, which will be valid for about 9 or 10 sectors very soon, 4 of which the cabinet decision has been taken, the objective of which is to incentivize investors in this country to put up globally comparable capacities in scale and in competitiveness. And I think that because those incentives will be given post facto on the basis of what they've achieved, this is a scheme which is unique and historical in the country. But I wanted to say all of this to say that yes, we will do all of this as all nations have done, as all economies have done, but it will be done in the global context. It will be done in India remaining open. It will be done with India trying to regain its share in global and regional production chains. It will be done with the respect to multilateral trading orders and rule-bound orders, and it will not imply in any sense any form of isolation, closed economy, or protectionism. If there is any support that is given to domestic enterprises, it will all be catered towards and targeted towards creating globally competitive capacities, and any support that we give them through tariffs would have an inbuilt sunset clause. So I wanted to emphasize this. India's commitment to an open order, India's commitment to a global economy, India's commitment to see Asia-Pacific region as a region which is thriving, which has got more and more interactions amongst them, and where trade continues to rise despite the IMF's rather ominous projections that trade will see maybe a 24% decline this year compared to, along with the 4.5% decline in global GDP. We will do our best to increase the share of trade in our GDP, and I'm hoping that the Asia-Pacific region which is known for its for using trade as a driver of growth, will continue on that path and make the Asia Pacific a far more integrated, vibrant, and a driving force for the global economy. Thank you very much for listening to me.
I to thank Dr. Shiraji for your valuable and enlightening inputs and remarks. It's truly been an honor, sir, to have you with us. I am sure that the members of CASI and all those logged on have benefited greatly by your comments, and a very big thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We now move on to the presentations section, and we have our first speaker, Mr. Abdul Abiyad, Director, Macroeconomic Research Division, Macroeconomic Research Division, Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department of Asian Development Bank. Welcome, Mr. Abiyad. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for the invitation to speak to both Kaki and also for to Fiki for hosting this event. I was asked to speak about how Asian economies would be affected by the containment measures that have been put in place, and hopefully they can pull up the presentation soon. And very much, in fact, that was one of the themes that came out of our Asian Development Outlook report, which was released a few weeks ago in September. And yes, so the title of the report was A Precarious Path to Recovery. The Asian Development Outlook report comes out twice a year. The first one came out in April, and this update came out in September. And if you can go to the next slide, please. I'll just highlight sort of the key messages before I dive into some slides that illustrate that. The first key message from the report is that after many, many years of very strong and sustained growth, developing Asia will contract time this year in more than in close to 6 decades. So we expect a contraction of minus 0.7% this year in the ADB's 46 member countries. And again, those span everywhere from Central Asia to the Pacific. We expect growth to rebound by 6.8% next year, but as I will show in one of my slides, this actually implies only a partial recovery. The second main message is that the downturn is really broad-based because this pandemic is truly global, and that 3/4 of our member economies are expected to contract this year. One of the most important exceptions is China, which we expect to grow by 1.8% this year, and that's one of the reasons why the contraction is not so sharp. If you take out China, the contraction in the rest of developing Asia is somewhere in the order of 4.5%. And the last key message from the report is that despite this pretty downbeat baseline, the risks to the outlook are primarily on the downside, with the biggest risk really being the possibility of a prolonged pandemic, which could take the form of either sustained first waves in some countries or second and third waves in other countries. And we're actually seeing some of that manifesting now. Another key risk that we worry about are geopolitical tensions, in particular, the most prominent of which is the one between the US and China over trade and technology. And Mr. Koo will be talking about that later. And then also, we need to think about what the longer term social and economic impacts are of this pandemic. And that's something I think will also be very relevant for your businesses as we go forward. Next slide, please. So just to give some context, obviously, the whole economic outlook is really shaped by how the pandemic is proceeding. So let me start with that. What this chart shows you is how the outbreak is proceeding at a global level on the left-hand side chart, and within developing Asia on the right-hand side chart. In both charts, I use a log scale. So each time you go from one horizontal bar to the next, it's a 10-fold increase. And what you can see, this chart shows us data up to the beginning of this week. And as of the beginning of this week, all 4 lines you see there, developing Asia, Latin America, the US, and Europe, which, well, we're just using Euro area here. They were all experiencing about 60 to 70,000 new cases daily. Now, to show you how quickly things change in the span of 1 week, things have changed already pretty substantially. And you can actually see that from the trajectories even in this chart. So although they were close to the same point at the end of this chart, things are improving in developing Asia. So currently, cases in developing Asia are now around 70,000 new cases daily. And whereas in the United States, where they're now on their third wave, they're currently close to about 90,000 new cases daily. In the Euro area, where you can see the first wave in April and then it coming down, they're really now in the middle of their second wave. That has now crossed 100,000. So put it simply, really we're still in the midst of this global pandemic. If we zoom in now to developing Asia on the right-hand side chart, you can really see there that South Asia is really the epicenter. It accounts for, so again, if you, in this chart, it would be about 60,000. It's fallen, I think, further to closer to 50,000 now. And that accounts for the bulk of new cases in developing Asia. Southeast Asia and Central Asia are currently running at about 6 to 8,000 cases daily, new cases daily. East Asia, where the pandemic started, which includes China, is currently running at just about 100 cases daily, and the Pacific has, close to just 1 case daily. So it really varies across the globe, but also within developing Asia. Next slide, please. So as a result of these outbreaks, as we all know, there have been containment measures have been imposed across our countries to varying degrees. And so these charts rely on data from Oxford University's Government Stringency Index, and they combine measures on workplace closures, school closures, travel bans, and the like. And as you can see, those really peaked, these containment measures or lockdowns really peaked in April and May, with the lockdowns, as Dr. Reddy mentioned earlier, really being most stringent in South Asia. And you can also see that on the bars on the right-hand side chart. I know the countries are too small to see, but I wanted to put this so that when we distribute the slides, you can actually see individual countries. And the middle band for South Asia, as you can see, those are where you see the darkest bands. And India was one of those that had the darkest bands and the longest lockdown. The other thing you do notice, though, in the left-hand side chart is that it was really not sustainable to keep large-scale lockdowns in place. And so despite outbreaks continuing, many of our countries had to have eased these containment measures over time. But it's still the case that there's still substantial differences across regions, with South Asia, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia having more stringent containment policies now relative to East Asia and the Pacific, where the outbreaks are not so severe. Next slide, please. And so because of these containment measures, there's been a direct impact on mobility outside the home. And so you can see this in the left-hand side chart, where we plot stringency on the x-axis and average mobility on the y-axis. And mobility is measured using Google mobility data. And what you can see is that you have the East Asian countries, which are denoted by orange dots in the top left corner. So less stringent containment measures and less declines in mobility. And then you have Southeast Asian countries in the middle, and then Central Asian and South Asian countries in the bottom right. So you have India and Nepal, where you had the most stringent containment and the biggest declines in mobility. It's obviously not uniform across regions. So here within Southeast Asia, you see the Philippines as having one of the most stringent lockdowns and very substantial declines in mobility outside the home. What that meant for economic activity is you can see on the right-hand side chart, which plots average mobility on the x-axis this time against the GDP growth decline in Q1 or Q2 on the y-axis, and this is relative to the fourth quarter of 2020. And so there again, you see a very strong correlation. The bigger the decline in mobility, the bigger the decline in GDP growth. And you can see, again, countries like the Philippines and Indonesia, which had very strict lockdown policies having the biggest quarterly declines in GDP in the second quarter. Next slide, please. So apart from the declines in domestic activity as a result of lockdowns, we also saw a big hit to trade, again because this is a global pandemic and you were seeing demand decline in many other countries as well. What we see here are real exports on the left hand side and real imports on the right hand side, and we're showing the global figures are in the black dashed lines. The G3, the Euro area, US and Japan, are shown in brown or orange, and developing Asia in green. And what you see is sort of that sharp decline in April and May, but it has bottomed out and it's recovered. This chart needs to be updated. We have data to August now, which shows that the recovery has continued. And what you see, so two takeaways is one was a sharp collapse, but bottoming out in the recovery already. But also that Asia's trade fell by less than global trade. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Let me speak about the right-hand side chart first. One is that China's decline in economic activity was not as sharp. As we know, it was a decline in the first quarter and then a recovery already in the second quarter. And so as a result, the decline in imports has not been so bad. But on the export side, what has helped developing Asian exports was exports of things like health supplies and electronics from China and other countries in Southeast and East Asia, and that's really helped support exports, regional exports, through this period. Next slide, please. So if you combine the decline in domestic activity and external demand, what you get is basically a slump in growth in the first half of 2020, and we see that in this chart, which shows us, using the yellow dots, GDP growth in both 2019 and the first half of 2020 for 11 major Asian economies. And so you have China and India on the left, you have Southeast Asian countries in the middle, and you have newly industrialized economies on the right. And so you can see, bar none, all of these countries experienced a decline in GDP growth in the first half of this year relative to last year, and in many cases, an outright contraction. And you can see that it's really been across the board. There's been a hit to external demand, which you see in gray, but also, and quite surprisingly, if you've been following this for many years, consumption, domestic consumption, which is shown in the orange bars. This has been very steady over the past years. For example, it kept Asia growing through the trade conflict of the past 2 years, but because of the lockdowns, you've seen contractions in consumption in many countries, including in China, in India, Malaysia, the Philippines, and many other countries. And you've also seen a hit to investment, which is shown in the blue bars here. This is a contribution by investment to overall GDP growth. And you see that most pronounced in India and the Philippines, again, two countries where the lockdowns were most strict and the declines in economic activity were most severe. Next slide, please. So in response to this sharp downturn in economic activity, Asian governments stepped in with a wide-ranging crisis response. And so what you see here comes from ADB's COVID-19 policy database, which we update almost every week to incorporate all the information on the various policy measures. And we categorize those policy responses into these various subcomponents you see here. So just looking at developing Asia as a whole, which is on the left-hand side, the overall policy response is on the order of 15% of regional GDP, and about 8% of that comes in the form of government support to income and revenue. So these are household transfers or support to small and medium-sized enterprises and the like. And the remaining support, which are the rest of the bars, is in the form of credit and liquidity support. And that accounts for roughly, if you add those up, they come up to about 7% of regional GDP. And you can also see that there's substantial variation across subregions. Next slide, please. So despite this government support, it will be the case that Asia will contract this year again by 0.7%, as I said earlier. And we've been revising our forecasts down substantially since first in April and then again in June, and this forecast is as of September. We expect growth to be 6.8% in the region next year. But if you translate that to GDP levels, which is what you see on the right-hand side chart, so again, if you just growth rates on the left, translate them to GDP levels or output, which is, if you're a business person, you actually care about the level of output as opposed to the growth rate. What you see there is that, so you see this slight decline in the solid red line in the level of output. That's a 0.7% decline. And then you see a sharp rise in 2021, but it's not going to get us back to the dashed line, which was the pre-COVID, which were pre-COVID expectations. So in other words, it's not a V-shaped recovery. What this is a partial recovery. There are various names to the shapes, but all you have to remember is that we're not. It's going to take a while for us to recover completely. Next slide, please. So here's just a more granular snapshot of our forecasts, where countries are grouped by sub-region. And first thing to note is that the forecasts for 2020, which are the first pink bars in both columns, you see the red arrows basically saying, everybody has been downgraded, bar none. All countries have seen downgrades to their forecasts, and most of those forecasts are now negative. So as I said, 3/4 of our member economies, 33 out of 46, are expected to contract this year. A few exceptions. China is one, 1.8% growth. Vietnam is another. We expect also 1.8% growth. The biggest downward revision and the biggest the biggest downward revision among the major economies is India, and this is a fiscal year forecast where we are expecting a contraction of 9% for the fiscal year. And so again, to just emphasize that there's substantial variation across the region, a lot of it reflecting the severity of the outbreaks and how quickly those outbreaks were or were not controlled. Slide, please. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So just to talk about the risks, as I mentioned, we see the main risk as being a prolonged pandemic, either an extended first wave or recurrent waves, which obviously would stifle a recovery because you would need containment measures to be reimposed, as we're seeing, for example, in Europe right now, and which we worry about, that it could potentially trigger crisis in some economies. The report that came out last month does have a quantitative downside scenario where we quantify exactly how big we think those effects might be if we went through such a prolonged pandemic. The second risk we worry about is worsening political tensions, most notably U.S.-China frictions over trade and technology. And again, Mr. Koo will talk about that later. There is an upside risk from early vaccine arrival, and really progress has been much faster than expected, but there are many caveats to that. Again, it depends a lot on the efficacy and longevity of any vaccines that are developed, but also the ability to produce and distribute them rapidly, and where our countries lie in terms of being able to obtain those vaccines. So even if vaccines are developed, let's say in the first quarter or become available by first quarter of next year, it might not be until the second half of next year that many of our countries might be able to get hold of large supplies of vaccines. Lastly, there are unclear long-term effects of the pandemic. Both on growth potential, human capital is taking a hit, both in terms of health, but also education, as many children are, kept out of school, for example. You also have declines in human capital if people stay unemployed for prolonged periods. Income inequality is something we worry about as a development bank, again, both through prolonged unemployment and people dropping out of the labor force, but also the digital divide. As digitalization increases, those who don't access will fall behind. And lastly, there's a question of trade, which Dr. Stokel will talk about next, and where that is headed. So let me end with one slide that actually echoes what Dr. Kumar had just spoken about. Next slide, please. which is basically that, although the near-term situation does look very negative, we do have to keep in mind that the pandemic will end eventually and growth will return. So we already expect growth to return next year. And it's important that Asia will remain the driver of global growth. So this is just an illustration of what Dr. Kumar had mentioned, that basically the orange bar shows you developing Asia's contribution to global growth. And if you look at the past decade, about 50 to 70% of global growth was because of developing Asia. And if you even if you look at this year, which, as I said, is pretty bad, it's first contraction in 6 decades. If you look at how developing Asia fares relative to everybody else, yes, it's a decline, but you're seeing declines of 4 or 5% in the US, 8 to 9% in the Euro area, and 5% in Japan. And so, and you look forward for the next 5 years, we're going to return again to a situation where Asia is likely to. So these are a combination of ADB's forecasts and IMF forecasts for the longer term. And again, the expectation is that Asia again will return to being the driver of global growth. So I thought I just want to end on that note to emphasize that sometimes we may be too pessimistic if we focus too much on the short run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abiyad. Thanks for giving a detailed analysis on the impact and obviously ending on a very positive note that Asia is going to drive the next growth. So with this, may I now invite Dr. Andrew Stockill, Honorary Professor, Center for Applied Macroeconomic Analysis from Australian National University. Over to you, Mr. Andrew.
Well, thank you very much. And it's very good morning and afternoon, I suppose, to some participants. And it's certainly a pleasure to be talking to you today. Just to build on what the previous speaker, Mr. Abdul Abiyad, said, he doesn't need a professor of economics to tell you that the world trading environment is very tough, and it certainly is. But what's not as well appreciated, and I'll just have the first slide up on the main points I want to make today, is that there's a lot of threats to this international trading system. Next slide, just on those main points. What's happened is over the last 30 years to 2008, up until the global financial crisis, we saw a period of hyper-globalization and where trade grew enormously. And economists have now well established that the causation goes from trade to growth. And so a lot of prosperity stemmed from that. But this has now gone into reverse, and whether or not that's permanent or temporary is important. And there's a few long-term developments there that have been building for some time and that are unappreciated. And to address these and try and turn them around requires some pretty careful diagnosis, because you can't fix something unless you really know what's caused it. Next slide, thanks. So what are these problems that I'm really talking about that are there? Well, the USTR Special Trade Representative Lighthizer has said the world needs a reset of the WTO. And now what's the problems here? Well, it really started pretty much 21 years ago at the Battle of Seattle in 1999, where activists basically trashed the town. I was there at the time, and it was full of tear gas, and the talks failed to get up. Ultimately, the Doha round got launched, but then it was scheduled to finish in 2004, and it basically has just fundamentally died. In its place, we've seen the proliferation of these free trade agreements, which are really preferential trade agreements, and World Bank analysis and others show that not all of them leave a country better off. Some of them have actually led the country to be worse off, unwittingly to themselves. So we've seen trade wars, as already mentioned, between US and China, but also there's a trade war brewing between the United States and Europe, particularly over digital taxation and digital standards. And we've seen these sort of resort to trade sanctions being forced on non-trade issues. So Europe take away tariff preferences on Cambodia, on human rights grounds and so on. And we've also seen this COVID pandemic accelerating a lot of supply chain deglobalization and worries about supply chain security. So there's a lot of these issues there that matter. And let me show you on the next slide why this matters. Next slide, please. So you can see here in those first, up to the just before the global financial crisis, basically world exports to GDP were on a path to double over that 30 years. You know, that's an enormous rate of growth and progress. So that's trade as a share of world output. But since then, partly as a result of the global financial crisis and partly as a result of that COVID-19, there's been this huge drop in trade. And that's a forecast there from the IMF that Dr. Kumar mentioned, a 24% decline. So it matters enormously. And part of that reason, what's happened there, is not just related to the US-China fracas, because President Trump only came in 2016, in the middle of that period there. But let's have a look at see what matters on the next slide, why this US trade war has the potential to be very costly. You can see there in that red bar what is being considered by the United States in terms of tariff protection. There's an enormous increase, would put America as one of the most protectionist countries around. And so this is by the world's richest country, and that is potentially costly. Next slide. And the reason why it's costly, as you can see on this cartoon, which I borrowed from the Economist magazine, you basically shoot yourself in the foot when you put on tariffs. So we've got the biggest two economies in the world are basically imposing this self-harm over this trade war. And I won't go into that any further because the next speaker, Richard Koo, is going to go on that at large. But I can't talk on trade without mentioning this US-China trade war. Next slide, please. But what's underappreciated is that there's several reasons for this. One is the rules themselves. There's lots of inconsistencies, there's contradictions and ambiguities, there's exemptions, as well as the concept of reciprocity itself and a single undertaking. This is all basically causing an undermining of the system. The second is that the trade rules are being used to fix problems they can't fix. So trade rules, there's an effort to put labour standards into trade agreements, the environment into trade agreements, human rights, and so on. Now, all of those issues can be very important and all need addressing, but is the World Trade Organization the right vehicle to do this? Because there's a fundamental thing, you cannot kill two birds with one stone. And this overreach of the WTO is causing a lot of discredit to the way the organisation functions. The third thing and problem is that things have changed. It's a new world. There's new economic development. There's a digital economy. There's e-commerce, internet standards. And what's going to come to the fore is these rising capital flows as a driver of trade, because capital flows are the determinant of your current account surplus or deficit. And these capital flows drive your exchange rate and drive the trade performance. And that's very underappreciated. And as a result of the pandemic and the massive amount of debt financing and differences between countries and the amount of debt level and the need to roll that over is going to cause big changes to relative exchange rates going forward. The fourth problem is, I've already mentioned, that declining hegemony by the United States, and then the rise of China giving this trade war, and it's basically fueled by a very protectionist President Trump. So next slide, please. So that's what's caused the problem. Let me delve into some of those problems and mention them. So one of the fundamental pillars of the entire GATT is Article 1, which says non-discrimination. And that's important because it's the bedrock of the system. It provides open competition, which gives the maximum incentive to innovate. And it's innovation that leads to productivity and efficiency. But the trouble is that Article 24 of the same agreement says you can discriminate. You can have a preferential free trade agreement with someone else. So is non-discrimination a good feature or is it a bad feature? So you get these contradictions in there. And then the whole notion of reciprocity is based on this very wrong mercantilist thinking of exports are good, but imports are bad. And that basically leads to the real root cause of the problem is that we have a series of nation states in the world that are the only game in town where with a nation state, the sovereignty within the border is respected, and that works for the rules within a country, but what are you going to do for trade and exchange with another country? How are you going to enforce those rules? So on the next slide, just delve and stick with me here, delve a little deeper into really this sort of problem. Because you see, a modern market can't exist, whether it's trade, an external market or an internal, without a scaffolding provided by the government. And what do I mean by scaffolding? This is secure property rights, the enforcement of contracts, the enforcement of the rule of law, a trusted financial system, payments clearance, a currency. There's a whole set of issues on standards and so on that all allow a market to function smoothly and efficiently. Now, see, the issue is that different nation states with different cultures and preferences provide and deal with those in different ways. But globalization implies that you have the same, right? Complete globalization means everyone's harmonized, but people don't want to do that. So you get this problem where you can run into, and it leads to the second problem, next slide please, where people try to do too much with these things. Because of these differences between nation states, people have different preferences for what labour standards might be involved or what environmental standards might be involved. The trouble is there are different vehicles to deal with these things. So the International Labour Organization deals with labour standards. The International Panel on Climate Change is addressing climate change. The World Bank and the Asian Development Bank are established to help development. And the IMF, that's also there to look after the security of the financial system and so on. So the problem we've got is that the trade weapon is far too tempting as a force to put other countries into compliance, right? And so now we're seeing a huge effort to put carbon adjustments at the border into trade agreements. But using an ineffective policy puts the WTO into disrepute, right? So you see, a lot of issues like climate change would exist even if there was no international trade. International trade cannot fix that problem. So the WTO needs to stick to its knitting and avoid overreach. Otherwise, we lead to a world where you get Brexit, where you get a pullback. A society says, well, we're sick of that. Let's pull back from integration. And that's potentially very costly. Next slide, please. Then we go to the third issue I mentioned, that things change. There's a whole lot of new issues there. In the change, right, there's economic development, technology, the digital revolution, you know all these things, right? But rising importance of intellectual property. But the underappreciated one there is those capital flows that I mentioned. Because of this large increase in debt and by different amounts by different countries and the need to roll over and service those debts, it will start to generate some very large capital flows, the mirror image of which will be current account surpluses and deficits and changing exchange rates, which will then change trade performance. So potentially we're in a world where that's going to cause a lot of trouble. So and a final one we've seen as a result of this pandemic, this COVID pandemic, is that a lot of countries have started to worry about self-sufficiency and the supply chain security, and that's fueling another set of protectionist demands. So there's a fundamental question here of what of these new issues need addressing, by what forum, in what way. And it's not clear which institution is always the best choice, but that needs thinking through, otherwise you get to this world of overreach and then disrepute of the trading system. So one of the new issues, next slide please, problem number 4, and I've got a couple more slides to go. You've got the next one. Is this one of the things that's changed, that everyone is full aware, is this changing hegemony. So we've seen the rise of China, everyone knows, and so on. But part of the whole post-war global prosperity is we've seen global governance, right? In the absence of a global government, this global governance has been delivered by these global institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the Asian Development Bank, and so on, etc. And they've been led by a dominant power, the United States. Now, the trouble is, see, the United States is no longer the dominant power. And so the support for these global institutions has waned under President Trump. Now, part of that is political and his political leanings, but part of it all is economic. Because when America was the richest, most prosperous nation on earth, bar none, then whatever was good for the world was also good for America. Now, that is not the case. So their incentive to act as this leader is not as important as it once was. So one outcome we've seen, as I've already mentioned, is this trade war with China, and Richard Koo will mention and talk more on that. But another is the demise of the WTO dispute settlement system with its inoperative appellate body. So there are now calls for a new Bretton Woods agreement by the IMF chief, and there's calls for a reset of the WTO arrangements by the US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. Well, what is the next slide? What is he actually calling for? What does America want? And we should pay attention to this, because what America has a big influence still on the world. Lighthizer suggested 5 things to fix this trade array. First of all, agree to some baseline tariffs that apply to everybody. And the suggestion there is to use the average tariffs in the industrialized country economies as they are now. So everyone has that same tariff. Now, that's not necessarily right. He's made a mistake there. Second, he calls for an end to this free trade agreement land grab, which is undermining the WTO's core MFN principle, the most favoured nation principle that I mentioned already. Third, he's asking for the end of special and differential treatment for large and advanced economies. Economic development is a real issue, but it's better led by the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or whatever. There are better vehicles for delivering economic development than special and differential treatment. The fourth thing he's asked for is new rules to stop distortions from China's state capitalism. So subsidies and state-owned enterprises is a big deal. Mind you, America and Europe, when you're seeing that big debate about subsidies to aircraft manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing, they're not immune from that issue either. The fifth issue is for the WTO dispute settlement system to be totally rethought. And in particular, he asked for a single stage process with one-off panels applied only to the disputing parties. So there's a pretty list there, and what's the right thing to do? So in injecting and shaping that debate, which is going to happen anyway, is going to be important. So the key messages, let me summarise on the final slide, please, if we put that up. The key messages are the following. First of all, the trade share of world output nearly doubles in 30 years to 2008. And that led to a huge increase in prosperity. That wasn't just China. Remember, China just joined the WTO in 2001. There's been this whole thing through Asia, etc., and growing trade, and it's been facilitated by this open, predictable, multilateral system administered by the WTO. It's been an important contributor to that. Now, why has that trade grown so much, so fast? Well, because it makes economic sense and it's generated a whole lot of prosperity. And so you can see if that's threatened or if that stalls, then that potentially is very costly. And that's the thing we've got to try and stop. And since 2008, that trade growth has stalled. Most people will attribute this to the two global recessions, the global financial crisis and the current pandemic. But it's also been caused by several factors undermining the world trading system. And then it's recently visible in that US-China trade war and the collapse of the WTO's appellate body. But you can't just say that's President Trump. You've got to ask the question, what were the contributing factors that led to that situation? Because the World Trade Organization and all its rules were set up to avoid the very situation that we're in now. And so they've clearly failed. But what do we do in response? So the result is the WTO is in disarray, and we're going to have this ongoing scramble to form preferential trade agreements. But as I mentioned, preferential trade agreements have many disadvantages. They're very second best. And actually, it's been shown by the World Bank, some countries have been left unwittingly worse off. So my final point there is that the world can't afford this low growth option. Right? Attempts are going to be made to reopen and provide a predictable multilateral trading system. But things have changed. And so we've got this question, what rules, what discipline should we have for maximum prosperity going forward? And I think we all need to be part of this and shape that outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew Stockel. I think this was a very interesting presentation on the challenges and restoring the multilateral trading system. We now go ahead with Mr. Richard Koo, Chief Economist, Nomura Research Institute, who is going to give a presentation on China-US trade friction and its impact on the global economy. Over to you, Mr. Koo.
Okay, this is Richard Koo from Tokyo. Thank you for having me here. I think I will follow very closely on what Andrew just said about the world trading system. Actually, unlike many economists working for the investment banks, I was actually involved in US-Japan trade friction 25 years ago. And the reason I got into it was that I was on Japanese television a lot talking about various economic issues. And then US ambassador to Japan, Walter Mondale, a former vice president, realized that, hey, this guy Richard Koo carries an American passport. He should be able to help us with this US trade issues. And so I was invited to US embassy, and he asked me, can you present the US case to the Japanese? And when Americans don't even buy American cars, how do you expect the Japanese to buy American cars? But I said, well, let's see what I can do.
इस बार क्या president कुछ दे रही है drivers वगैरह के लिए?
Manish ji, mute.
I will go to the US embassy to get the briefing, and then I go to the television shows where there's half a dozen Japanese waiting to shoot me down with a gun, and I'm the only American in the crowd, trying to explain why it is in the Japanese own interest to compromise with the American position on opening the markets. Well, I must say that it was a very ugly experience. Sometimes get almost racist, but I learned a lot in the process. And then I see similar things happening between US and China today, what was happening between Japan and United States 25 years ago. So if I may ask you to turn to the first slide. the next, yes, this one. This one shows the percentage of trade deficit that Japan and China accounted for. And back in 1991, Japan accounted for as much as 65%, 66% of U.S. trade deficit, just one country. And if you add Taiwan, it goes up very sharply further also. So you can imagine how much bashing Japan got back in those days. And then when you look at fast forward to now, China accounts for about 40% of U.S. trade deficit. And if you add ASEAN countries together with the other three, the Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, it adds up to something like 70% of U.S. trade deficit. And so if U.S. could somehow deal with these issues, it will reduce U.S. tensions considerably. But in the current debate, there are two parts where I'm afraid most of academic economists got it wrong. One of them is about free trade. We were taught in our university days that free trade creates both winners and losers in the same country, but the gain the winners gets are so much larger than the loss the losers sustain. So country as a whole should gain from free trade. At least that's how I was taught about free trade back in my university days. But none of the professors ever told us that for that conclusion to hold, the trade must be balanced or in surplus. If it's balanced or in surplus, of course, the gain of the winners are much larger than the loss of the losers. But what happens if the country continues to run large deficits year after year after year? Then the number of losers in the country begins to grow. The last time United States had a trade balance, not even surplus, balance, was 1980, 40 years ago. Since then, the country kept on running huge deficits year after year after year. By 2016, November 2016, the number of Americans who consider themselves losers of free trade were large enough to elect Donald Trump president. And this was not a Donald Trump phenomenon either. If you remember the arena where Hillary Clinton was nominated to become the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, if you remember that image, or you can go back to YouTube or whatever, she was surrounded with all these Democrats, 10,000, 20,000 Democrats yelling Hillary for president, Hillary for president. They were all carrying one sign. What did that sign say? The sign said, "No to TPP." I'm sure none of these 10,000 Democrats read the TPP agreement. It's one of the most advanced free trade agreement ever put together. They were just saying no to free trade. And if you remember Bernie Sanders, who also ran for presidential election this time, he was completely against free trade from the very beginning. So by November 2016, Americans had no choice but to see three candidates, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump, all against free trade. Donald Trump more towards protectionism, Hillary Clinton closer to it, and so forth. So this is the change that we are facing today. The U.S. kept on running trade deficit for so long. So many people in the United States are feeling that they are not benefiting from free trade. And we really have to adjust the system that allowed so much deficit to go on for so long. And if I may ask you to move to the next slide. Next slide, please. At that time, between US and Japan, United States started, or the two countries started this structural impediments initiative. And when you look at what was in it, Americans are complaining about the price mechanism in Japan, distribution, logistics, savings and investment, land usage, Keiretsu arrangement, where Japanese companies only buy from other Japanese companies within the same group, and then many exclusionary business practices against obtaining patent and so forth. These are almost exactly the kind of things that Americans are asking the Chinese to do right now. So this part is nothing new. China really have to either change its ways of doing things, or else the U.S. will have to take more and more protectionist measures, because the mechanism is not balancing the two trade. And some of the problems that Andrew just mentioned on the earlier presentation. And if I may ask you to move to the next slide. So this is what I just told you earlier. What we were taught about free trade, that everyone's supposed to gain from free trade, was actually not a complete picture. For free trade to gain everyone, the trade has to be balanced. And if it's not balanced, and if you continue to run deficit like the United States, you end up losing, you end up having more people believing that they are losers of free trade. And now we reached a point where those people are large enough to elect someone like Trump president. Now, I'm sure if Biden wins the next election, which we don't know that yet, things will change a little bit. But Biden also was talking about buying America. And buying America is not exactly free trade either. And he wants to make sure that government procurement will largely be directed toward US companies. And so there might be some change, but I think the direction is not going to change all that much. Now, if I may ask you to skip the next slide and go to Exhibit 5. Sorry, I had it in the wrong order. Chinese have been arguing that, but this trade problem has nothing to do with us. It's the savings and investment balance in the United States that Americans are just consuming too much and saving too little. Whereas we in China or in Japan, and Japanese used that argument 25 years ago as well, we save a lot and, and consume less, and that's why we have this trade imbalance. A lot of economists, I'm afraid, have gone on to this argument and are basically saying, oh, Americans are just enjoying their life too much and consuming too much, having barbecue every weekend and so forth. But if that argument is correct, something else also has to be correct. And that is that if American manufacturers, those who are competing with imports, if they are doing very well, but they still cannot produce enough, then, of course, Japan or China, maybe one day India, will have to come in to fill the gap because the demand is there, supplies is not sufficient. But what's actually happening in the United States over the last 40 years, 50 years, is that those industries that were competing with imports have done very, very poorly. Hundreds have gone bankrupt. Millions of people lost their jobs. And if that's the case, what is the reason behind this trade deficit in the United States? It cannot be because of the savings and investment balance, because if that balance is the reason, all these import competing industries should be doing better, not worse. And I would argue that there's another possibility for this to happen, and that is the exchange rate. If the dollar is out of whack, then no matter how hard these import competing industries operate, imports will be still coming in cheaper and then take over your market. And if I may ask you to look at the next slide, this is one very simple indicator of how strong the dollar is. This is called the Big Mac Index, and this is about Big Mac or McDonald's adjusted for all sorts of things to understand whether the dollar is overvalued or not. And as you can see, only in Switzerland and somehow Lebanon are the only two countries that are overvalued against the US dollar. Everyone else is undervalued. And India, 56%, 57%, that range. Now, India, as a developing country, you can get away with some undervaluation. But Eurozone, 16%, Japan, 36%, China, 46%. These are very large numbers. And that explains why US companies have been doing so poorly, why US workers have been doing so poorly. And why do we get this kind of dollar devaluation, dollar overvaluation, sorry? It comes from the factor that Andrew mentioned earlier. It comes from capital inflows. On 1980, Japan, United States, and Europe all liberalized their international capital flows. So for the first time, Americans could buy Japanese equities. For the first time, Japanese could buy US treasuries. And that flow basically overwhelmed the exchange rate market. Originally, the exchange rate market was supposed to bring the two trading partners together, reduce the imbalance of trading partners by pushing the exchange rate of the surplus countries up, bringing the deficit countries down. But that mechanism broke down in 1980 when they allowed the capital flows, international capital flows. And so the fundamental issue we faced on the trade balance is this capital flows basically undermining free trade agenda. And this is something that WTO, when it was put together, GATT, when it was put together back in 1947, never contemplated that exchange rates could be completely out of whack from what is needed to balance trade. Now, that's the general part of why US has turned protectionism. But then I would like to move into US-China issues, the specific to US-China issues. And can I ask you to move the slides back one step? That's exhibit 4. Sorry, exhibit 4. Yes. So President Trump, until early this year, was still of the mindset that, well, as long as you get a good deal, everything will be fine. I mean, he only cares about the good deal. So he was not too worried about democracy or the other issues. But the rest of Washington, and this is starting around June of last year, June of 2019, we're beginning to realize that, wow, we have a huge problem in our hands, because there were a large number of Americans who thought by helping China prosper, China will eventually become democratic. And it's this kind of people who put China into WTO back in 2001. Let me put it back a little bit. There are two groups of people in the United States, right? Pro-China and anti-China. Anti-China people are very simple types. They were basically saying, you don't trust communists, you don't trust communist dictators, no matter where they come from, whether Chinese or Russian, Venezuela, wherever, you don't trust them. That's the anti-China group. But we have this very interesting group called pro-China. And the pro-China group said, look, Chinese are just like us. If they become prosperous, I'm sure they want more rule of law, democracy, human rights, and so forth. Look at what Chinese are doing after 1978 when Deng Xiaoping opened the market. Chinese are studying all over the world, visiting all these sites all around the world. This Chinese communism is very different from the Eastern European or Soviet ones that were completely closed. China is learning from everyone and trying to learn Western ways. So let's help them. That was the pro-China group. And since 1978 to the most present period, for the first 10 years, first 30 years, which group, the pro-China group, anti-China group, turned out to be correct? It was the pro-China group, because China became increasingly open. If you go to China, you can talk to almost anybody. As long as you don't talk about Dalai Lama or Taiwan independence, you can talk about almost anything. And it was a very free flow of exchanges. And so pro-China group kept on saying, look, China is becoming more like us, so we should help them. Well, something changed around 6-7 years ago when Mr. Xi Jinping came along. And then the things began to move in the opposite direction. As you know, there's about 300 million surveillance cameras all over China. all these human rights lawyers are now in jail, and all sorts of problems. China managed to hack US computers. Now the things are very different. And those pro-China people who said,
Mr. Koo, sorry, I do not want to, because this is a very, very interesting presentation. In fact, I would love to. So, but we are little behind schedule. So, if you can just little behind schedule, I think you.
Well, we started very behind schedule, if I did the clock correctly.
Yeah.
So it's the other group, the rest of China, the rest of Washington group, which includes State Department, Defense Department, CIA, NSA, US Congress, and most recently FBI. These 5 agencies are very tightly working together to contain China. That they are realizing that they were mistaken by thinking that by enriching China, things will go things will eventually turn out okay, that China will become democratic. Now, these people feel they are betrayed. They were betrayed by the Chinese. And that feeling, I'm afraid, is very strong, correctly or incorrectly. And if I may ask you to move back to Exhibit 7. Sorry, Exhibit 7. 2 more. Sorry for this mistake. Now the US is saying, because of the Chinese political development, we have to be more principled. Principle realism here means China is not going to move toward democracy, and therefore we have to be prepared for it. And then now they have this another term called tolerance for greater bilateral friction. This means until recently, United States did not want to disturb China in any way. So they were telling Taiwanese, for example, to keep your heads down, and then telling other people to keep their heads down, because we don't want China to start feeling threatened and then go nationalistic. But now they're saying that policy didn't work, and we need to confront China. We are not afraid of confronting China. And the third point is that this whole idea of free trade was really to help countries not repeat the mistakes of World War II. That is to say, if you're democratic and if you don't have any territorial ambitions, our market will be open to you. And that's how Japan, West Germany became so rich after the war. But if the China was going toward democracy, of course, that principle would apply to them. But if the China is not going toward that direction, then now they are saying, no, we cannot open our markets fully to the Chinese products. Against that, the Chinese have their own arguments, and that is that, yes, the Marxist-Leninism that was practiced in USSR and Eastern Europe did not work very well. We agreed to that, but we Chinese made it better. So it's the Chinese with socialism with Chinese characteristics. And then other line is that this is going to confront the West, and therefore it's going to be a long struggle. We are prepared for the long struggle. And so a little bit of conflict between the United States, they're already, it's in the price, as it were. They're already prepared for it. And of course, Mr. Xi Jinping kept on saying that we should regain some of the territories we lost when we were weak. So this is going to be a very heavy conflict, I'm afraid. It's not going to go away anytime soon. Chinese might have a better system than what's practiced in the West, but we don't know that yet. But there's also a problem on the Chinese side. And if I may ask you to look at the next slide. Chinese demographics are actually going in reverse. And after 2011, the working age population began shrinking. I mean, if you have 1.4 billion people, you don't see too many shrinking, but it is actually shrinking. And by 2033 or so, it is expected that the total population will start shrinking. And we know what happens when total population starts shrinking, because we know the example of Japan. When the total population starts shrinking, people start saying, why do you invest in a country where there's no Japanese going to be around? And so that's a big issue for the Chinese. And if I may ask you to the next slide, China is in the middle of what people call the middle income trap. And I'm sure people in India are familiar with this term. If you're in the middle income, if you are the lowest cost producers in the world, all the factories from around the world come to you. But once your income start reaching 10,000 or so, then the many factories will start moving to other Southeast Asian countries and cheaper places. And China is in the middle of it. And so Chinese economists are extremely worried about this problem and are trying to do everything possible to get out of the middle income trap. If you have only 13 years left until your population peaks, and you're in the middle of a middle income trap, you cannot really afford to have a trade war with the Americans or anyone else for that matter. So the economist side of Mr. Xi Jinping's group are saying, let's have a quick deal with the Americans so that we don't waste whatever 15 years they have. We don't waste 10 years of that fighting the Americans, and we only have 5 years left to come out of the middle income trap. But the other group who are saying, we still can do it. We have all the resources because we have 1.4 billion people. We have a large domestic market. We don't really have to rely on foreign markets all that much. Those nationalist types are saying, let's not surrender to these American requests. So that's where the conflict is. I sincerely hope that economist types will prevail at the end. But given how tight the confrontation has become, I was told that it has become very difficult for Mr. Xi Jinping to change his direction now that the confrontation is in full swing. So we had a lot of very optimistic view on Asia up to now from previous speakers, but this confrontation, I'm afraid, is going to be with us for a while. And if I remember the US-Japan conflict 25 years ago, it was just economics. And just economics, it got that ugly. Now this one has a political angle to it. And so we really have to be very careful going forward, because otherwise Asia could become a very major hotspot going forward. Thank you very much.
Rajendra, you're on mute.
Yeah, it was such a great presentation, and you put together a different perspective to it. And with this, I think we have come to the close of this session, and we have several other speakers waiting for in the next session. So we would skip the Q&A, and we will have Q&A because we have so many questions pouring in, and frankly speaking, the subject that Mr. Abiyad and Dr. Stockel and Mr. Koo touched upon is really interesting and relevant for today. And so we have many questions. So maybe we will try to take some of them up after the next session if we have time. So with this, now we come to this opening session, and now we move to the session on member organizations and of CASI members, and we would like to give opportunity to CASI members. So we have first speaker, Mr. James Pearson, CEO, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So may I now invite Mr. Pearson? Over to Mr. Pearson.
Thank you very much for that invitation, and Chair and honoured guests, members of CASI, and also to our presenters today, Mr. Abiyad, Professor Stockel, and of course Mr. Koo. Thank you for describing so well the challenges and the fundamentals that lie before us. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is at a critical place. The drivers of growth around the globe were already under pressure before the pandemic, and challenges were already apparent, as we've heard, to some of the institutions that were so important to supporting global trade and economic growth since the end of the Second World War. We've seen in recent years, and particularly in the last few months, supply chains being disrupted, and we've seen countries adopting inward-looking policies to assert national economic sovereignty. Now, while on the one hand, many of us, I'm sure, can understand that this is an appealing approach, if short-sighted and narrow-minded, when societies are facing significant pressures, particularly in terms of medical and health supplies, in order to support their population to deal with the threat of the virus. But at the same time, these same policies are a grave risk of triggering a broader shift to protectionism across a whole range of industry sectors. And this would only impact economies nationally and internationally, and in turn slow down and make much harder our path back towards a greater prosperity for all after the pandemic. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry is proud to be a long-standing supporter and member of CASI, and we hope very much that other members would support us in our view that the institutional frameworks that have supported global trading systems and enabled all nations in the region and globally to advance seem no longer to all be fit for purpose, the purpose that they were created so many decades ago to fulfill. And we feel strongly that it's time for us, as CASI, as members of the regional business community, for us to stand up, to work with our governments, to help them to understand the essential importance of a rules-based international order, and that predictability and encouragement for business people to do trade across borders and to take risks and to invest their capital in each other's countries are critical. So I would like to thank CASI again for organising today's meeting. I would like to thank our presenters again for reminding us some of the fundamentals that we have to grapple with, and to end on a note of optimism, and that is, we have shown over the past 34 years that we understand the challenges, and by working together we can address them. That spirit of collaboration and cooperation has never been more important, friends, than it is today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Pearson. You've been thanks for your encouraging words, and with now I now go to Sheikh Fazle Fahim, President, the Federation of Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Vice President CASI. Over to you, Mr. Fahim.
Thank you very much. President CASI, Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, President FICCI, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog, esteemed presenter, respected panel chamber members, Dilip Chena, Secretary General FICCI, all protocols observed. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to you all. It's my privilege and honor to join the virtual 34th CASI conference on behalf of FBCCI, Bangladesh's exclusive umbrella trade organization. We congratulate and thank our esteemed global strategic partner, CASI and FICCI, and all its members for this initiative. 2020 and 2021 marks the 100th centenary of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who has planted the seeds on which Bangladesh is moving forward today. Next year is our 50-year anniversary. His legacy is a remarkable example of leadership and tenacity in the face of adversity. This year's conference theme, Achieving Sustainable Growth in a Turbulent and Disruptive Global Market, resonates deeply with the sustainability and recovery efforts of Bangladesh, spearheaded by Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. In response to COVID-19, Bangladesh's key economic interventions prioritize government expenditure for money circulation, improving banking liquidity, social safety net program with food aid to 45 million people, cash transfer to 5 million families, were all part of Prime Minister's comprehensive financial stimulus package of 12.1 billion, which is 3.7% of our GDP. It was all targeted to support enterprises across all spectrums, including agriculture, exports, manufacturing, service sector, and in informal sector, including grants for marginalized communities. Complementing the government's initiative, FBCCI's exhaustive engagement since February 2020, since when the supply side disruption happened, were in non-fiscal and fiscal support for enterprises, MSMEs to the largest sector. Tariff and tax intervention in our national budget were strongly advocated, which were adapted, which were included in all reduction of all income taxes, corporate tax, and custom duty industrial input taxes, among others. Our continuous engagements with our 130 global strategic partners and our government are underway with leaderships, both political and government executives and private sector stakeholders for sustainability for this year and recovery in the next two, back on the pre-COVID trajectory Bangladesh was on. FBCCI health advisory protocols for opening up our economy during COVID were undertaken with exhaustive consultation with domestic and global partners. Moreover, several social and philanthropic initiatives, including food programs, PPEs, health protective gears, hotspot city sanitizations, and etc., were to aid frontliners and marginalized communities throughout the country, were all undertaken from a private sector initiative, including goodwill gestures to multiple government, last being to Lebanon. As we navigate the next normal, we are confident in our economy as it is demonstrating strong recovery trend with GDP growth of 5.24%, remittance growth of 5.4%, foreign reserve growth of 10% in fiscal year 1920. From July to September this year, our export reached 10 billion, remittance about 7 billion, and foreign reserve is above $40 billion. FBCCI, as the host of 33rd CASI conference held in Dhaka last year, emphasized on the prospective synergy exploring private sectors of CASI nations' engagements, investment, trade, technology, and knowledge transfer. This synergy can contribute to its growth momentum in the next normal. Bangladesh's trade with CASI members decreased by 20% to 22.9 billion in fiscal year 1920 from 28.4 billion in fiscal year 1819. Trade recovery can be made through regional value chain initiatives with raw materials and knowledge from CASI member countries while maximizing Bangladesh's production competitive edge. Bangladesh's position can serve as a conduit between Asia, Pacific, and beyond. In addition to economic zones, FDI fiscal and non-fiscal incentives, which are one of the best in our region according to JETRO of Japan, diversifying industries and export markets have additional incentives for investments. And a point to be noted here is that most of the MNCs that are in operation in Bangladesh, we are their top number 1 to number 5 operations in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, aligned with Bangladesh's development trajectory, the present Federation of Bangladesh Chambers of Commerce and Industries Board launched FBCCI 2041, an Impact 4.0 initiative in June 2019 with global knowledge partnerships. Some of these initiatives are FBCCI Economic Applied Policy Research Center, FBCCI Alternative Dispute Resolution Center, FBCCI TechSea, FBCCI Institute, and FBCCI University. We welcome our CASI member partners' institutional partnerships in FBCCI Impact 4.0 for Bangladesh and beyond. FBCCI Impact 4.0 builds on our domestic strength, complemented with our globally top-rated institutional partnerships for LDC, SDG, Bangladesh's 2041, and Delta 2100 Delta Plan to mitigate challenges of global warming. These are all aligned with our 8 5-year plan, most which are aligned with SDG 2030. In closing, we look forward to our future engagements, maximizing our knowledge and resources towards complementary cooperation, towards sustainability and recovery. And best wishes to you all, and thank you for having us. It's good to hear and see many of our dear ones here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fahim. In fact, I did not have the privilege of visiting Bangladesh in the last physical conference meeting, but I heard about your warm hospitality, and hopefully in near future we will have the opportunity of returning some of extending our warm hospitality from here. With this, may I now invite Mr. Asim Ghani Usman, Chairman of International Affairs and Relations Committee, the Federation of Pakistan Chambers of Commerce. Over to you, Mr. Usman. Mr. Usman.
I think it's my turn because I see my picture.
Okay. So let's start. Okay.
So thank you very much. Very good morning and good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. My name, of course, is Pedram Sultani. I'm the ex-vice president of Iran Chamber of Commerce, Industries, Mines and Agriculture. I also like to join my friends thanking Fiki for hosting this event and also Cassie friends for organizing this event. I learned a lot from the speeches of the distinguished economists, but as a businessman, I always think that as much as we learn from the economy, we need to put our feet on the ground of the management afterwards in order to solve the issues and in order to manage the world, the country, the businesses, and so on and so forth. I shared just a small presentation. I don't know whether you can share it or you can show it so that I can start my my speech according to that.
Yeah, we have that. So we will upload it.
Okay, yes, please do. But one thing which is very important, in my opinion, for us as chamber leaders as well as business leaders is to pay attention to the redefinition of risks during the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, afterwards. Risk, of course, is one of the recent, I would say, issues of the management being developed within the past 30, 40 years and improved very much. But as we, please go to the next slide, as we reach to any incident and any event which comes to the world as a shock, and now I'm talking about non-technology driven issues like, for example, the world wars or the oil shocks of the 70s and 80s, a new norm is going to be imposed on the businesses. We should abide by the new norms. And in order to cope with that and abide by that, we need to redefine again the risks coming out of that incident. So COVID-19, of course, has created also a new norm for us. Risks are being formed and grow along the trends and the new business norms. So some of the new business norms are being triggered by technology, but some by those incidents, of course, which I have named here. So we can even compare COVID-19 with those world wars. That the war this time was declared against the humanity by nature and not by one or other countries. So as Dr. Rajiv Kumar correctly mentioned, we have a real challenge with the nature, with of course the environment, and we have to cope with that not only in terms of keeping the environment safe and sound for future generations, but also in terms of having a kind of coexistence with I would say viruses or microorganisms like that, that sometimes they attack the humanity because of not having enough respect for nature. So dealing with the health and economic impacts of the pandemic is creating new risks, and business leaders must identify the priorities and prioritize the tasks which they need to be taken. I would like to say that we can name what is facing now. I would say more than 90% of the countries, they have failed in managing the COVID pandemic, both in terms of the public management or management of the technocrats, of the government, and even businesses. So we have some exceptions of good management of the pandemic, which we should learn from. Please go to the next slide. We are at risk is a situation under which the decision is clear and the outcomes and the probabilities of occurrences are clear. We can quantify them. We can measure their intensity and so on and so forth. But there is also a black box opposite to risk, and we call it uncertainty. In uncertainty, we consider or we don't know exactly how to cope with the issue and how to manage it. Please go to the next slide. But an issue is that when we learn from one thing which happens to us, to the global community, then those uncertainties could be converted into risks. And now we can call pandemics like COVID-19 and even the future pandemics, we shouldn't consider them anymore an uncertainty or low probability risk. We should, of course, redefine the risk in a way that we, even if in future another pandemic like COVID will challenge the humanity, we'll learn from the current risk and how we can manage them both on the state level and also the business level. So the last slide, I would only like to remind, but please go to the next slide, to remind some of the tasks which we have as the chambers and the business leaders. So one task is to adapt our business model in the chambers with the mandates of the COVID-19. We need to move faster from the current business model of the chambers to the Chamber 4.0 in a way that we can offer all of our services more flexible and more IT-based. Also, we should have a risk assessment department or risk assessment officer in our chambers in order to accommodate those lessons and integrate them into our business, daily business, and also in order to be ready for the upcoming shocks, incidents, which we need to cope with. But on the government level, also, we need to negotiate with the government as the representative of small and medium-sized enterprises in order to enhance the risk assessment and risk management nationwide and at the country level, and also to improve the budget for putting into researches for healthcare and the like issues, and also in order to improve the infrastructure of the healthcare of the country. The third mandate and mission which we have is to protect the SMEs, not, of course, in this way, to teach them the principles of risk and risk management. You know that the issue of risk management and having a risk department is now only accommodated into big firms and big businesses. So small and medium-sized enterprises don't have enough budget and resources to have risk assessment departments. We can consider chambers playing this role for SMEs, teaching them, giving them guidelines, and protecting them whenever challenges like these will confront them. And the last one is our role in the society. Of course, many people lost their lives, many lost their jobs. Chambers need to focus their social responsibility projects more on those people which have been, of course, hit by COVID-19 more severely, than the other parts of the community, and also some of the campaigns or initiatives in cooperation with their members could alleviate a little bit the pain which has, of course, been widespread along many countries. And also, my last suggestion is for CASI. We have also, as a confederation, we have now felt how important risk and risk management is. We can also add a work group in CASI, risk assessment or risk management work group, and we can work on these issues for the upcoming events, annual events, and so on and so forth. So that's from my side, and thank you very much once again for giving me this chance. And I hope that we can work together much more, and we can exchange those which we have learned from this pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sultani. I can't agree with some of the suggestions which you have made coming from fellow chamberman. So we have also moved on to some newer areas and making ourselves more efficient, doing certain things for our, especially SME. So I do agree with we also need to rethink as a federation, as a chamber body, or even as CASI. So thanks for those valuable suggestions. And I now invite Mr. Muhammad Ali, former Vice President, the Federation of Pakistan Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Over to you, Mr. Ali.
Thank you very much. Respected participant, panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for providing me this opportunity. As you all know, that the global economy is reviving after the pandemic coronavirus, but some countries are still facing its repercussion. As we are all aware, the COVID-19 has significantly damaged the economic progress and the prosperity of the world. It is expected by the leading think tank that the global trade will going to be fall down between 13 to 32%. The COVID-19 is negatively affecting the global services trade, as many of the large suppliers and consumer of the services have imposed travel restrictions and social distancing measures. Export of the service trade in these countries down by 14 to 22%. Global commercial flights, including both passenger flights and air transport, were down by 74% between 5th January to 18th April 2020, and significantly affected global merchandise trade, both goods and services. Ladies and gentlemen, the important aspect emerged out due to this pandemic is the restrictions by some countries of the world on medicines, medical equipment, face and eye protection, protective garments, personal protection equipment, or personal protection products, sanitizer, pharmaceuticals, foodstuffs. This is a critical time in our history that compel us to think about the policies, particularly those who deals global trade of essentials and necessary products. There should be policies that should not deviate under the turbulent and disruptive environment that we have seen or still observing in some parts of the world. Dear participants, over the years, various models and frameworks on strategy development have been discussed and developed. Each offer its benefits and drawbacks and is optimal for certain competitive and environmental situations. What I think about strategy for achieving for sustainable growth in a turbulent and disruptive global market, we should consider capacity, competency, capability, and comparative advantage to produce certain types of goods for human life on the best available resources under the uncertain circumstances. We should know that the global economy is very much dependent on recovery of global supply and value chain. With this, I'm once again thankful to the CASI President, to the President and the Secretary General. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Ali. With this, may I now invite Mr. Boris Tuknitsky, President of Primorsky Chamber of Commerce Industry.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, my name is Alex Kushner. I'm the head of the Department of International Cooperation of the Primorsky Chamber of Commerce and Industry. which is located in the city of Vladivostok, the capital of the Primorsky territory and the capital of Far Eastern Federal District of the Russian Federation. It's a great honor for me to take part in this conference and represent the Primorsky Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Primorsky Chamber of Commerce and Industry is a non-governmental, non-profit organization based on membership, created on the initiative of Russian commercial and non-profit organizations and individual businessmen. Primorsky Chamber of Commerce was founded in 1964. It is the oldest regional chamber of commerce and industry in the system of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Russian Federation. Primorsky Chamber of Commerce and Industry represent the interests of small, medium, and large businesses, covers all fields of business, industry, domestic and foreign trade, agriculture, financial system, services. There is a branch of International Commercial Arbitration Court in the structure of Primorsky Chamber, and 2 years ago we created Trade House Primorsky, which is the agency company. Currently, the Primorsky Chamber of Commerce and Industry has about 300 active members. The members of our chamber are the most reliable companies who can be recommended for cooperation to Russian and foreign colleagues and investors. Over the past few years, our chamber has significantly intensified its work both with foreign businessmen and specialized organizations and associations. Currently, our chamber has signed a number of agreements with the Chambers of Commerce and Industry from China, Republic of Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and other countries. Also, agreement was signed with the representative offices of the provinces of China and Korea located in Vladivostok. What does it give to our foreign partners? First of all, it is an opportunity to use our information resources and a reliable partner, get advice on doing business on the Primorsky territory. In addition, we help to carry out communication with government authorities if necessary. In the era of the coronavirus pandemic, when there is no way to come and check your partner or some circumstances of the transaction personally, the role of chambers of commerce and industry or any similar organization is very much increasing. Therefore, in a turbulent situation, we, the representatives of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, should increase information exchange, provide more information, and process each application on a regular basis. The market situation changes very fast, and the more often we communicate, the more often fresh and relevant information will be delivered to our partners and clients. No one can say for sure what will be in demand on international markets in a month or in a year, but I can still assume that basic things will always be in demand. Food, drinking water, fuel, weapons and security equipment, medicines, minerals, timber. Almost all of these lists are made in the Primorsky territory. We do not talk about fuel and weapon. It is the prerogative of the state, not the region. Other goods as food, drinking water, minerals, timber can be exported from Primorsky territory, and these goods will always be in demand. Moreover, our manufacturers are ready to increase production volumes if they know the final buyer. And what can we import from other countries? Different kinds of technological equipment for fishing industry, food industry, woodworking industry. In addition, there is a demand fruits and sometimes of vegetables. So we return to the same fundamental action. We need a constant active information exchange, which can be directed and controlled by the Chambers of Commerce and Industry. And once again, I want to emphasize that we may not know about some of your or our needs and capabilities until we begin to communicate with each other regularly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alex. And with this, may I now invite Mr. Vasily Goltsov, First Vice President, Lipstick Region of Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Yes, dear Dr. Eddy, dear Mr. Modi, dear colleagues, of course, first I would like to heartily thank the authorities of the CASI for the opportunity to address the participants of today's conference. We see it as appreciation by the CASI, the important role of small and medium regional CCIs in bringing valuable changes to the world of trade and cooperation. You know that the 1933 Nobel Prize winner in literature, Ivan Bunin, that also was born in Lipetsk region, whose 150th anniversary we celebrate this month, he said that the one who doesn't risk is at risk most. So the private enterprise is always a risk of choice of correct partners, a risk of unexpected results, a risk of choosing methods of business strategy, and to help entrepreneurs to risk in a correct way, without harsh aftershocks. There is a system of chambers of commerce, old and new, big and small, which has a long history of helping business in unexpected and difficult situations. And the present situation with the pandemic is a classic example of temporary difficulty, which is successfully being fought by all the governments and chambers all over the world. And our chamber is also no exception. We started helping our members practically immediately once problems and difficulties avalanched. During the hot season of the pandemic, our chambers specialists committed themselves to analyzing information from our customers and official sources, and developing proposals of government measures of support that were accumulated and negotiated with the CCI, with the Russian Federation, and were later introduced and adopted at the federal level. Today also we may see disagreements between big countries on big issues, but everyone understands that there remains a need to maintain a stable world, given the high level of integration into the world economy of almost all the countries. And in the chambers of commerce and industry, which historically have been the bridges connecting the interests of political and economic communities, both on domestic and international arena, can become the doctors who maintain a climate of trust and need for further development. After all, in the chambers today, thanks to the extensive network of regional chambers around the world, that are a real functioning instrument to accumulate such issues, to analyze them, synthesize them, to put them forward for solution. So we're talking about the maintaining of stable inter-country relations through inter-regional ties, especially of an economic nature, through the exchange of B2B delegations, factually and online, the development of cooperation between small and medium enterprises via the mediation of CCI. And it's no secret that the most of the membership of the chambers are small and medium-sized businesses, which today are supported at all levels in any country. And such business is not very often immersed in global economic and geopolitical problems, being mainly engaged in the practical development of their territories and regional industries. They need effects in short time and medium time term, and they are not focused on super profits unlike corporations. Therefore, they always make contact, just like regional CCIs of any country, when they see a practical approach to cooperation and benefit, and working according to the principle, the future is not where we are going, but what we are creating. In this context, we are talking about also a new direction for us, this business diplomacy. And we don't need to give up useful contacts where it's possible and promises success. The world economy today keeps on working on all the continents despite the pandemic. The international movement of goods has become to some extent a salvation for our small and medium enterprises. That is thanks to the connection developed by our chamber and other CCI, including the ones in the KC structure. Our small and medium enterprises continued their export and thus kept production volumes and jobs. We witness now how economic accents are shifting towards the Asia-Pacific region countries. We clearly understand how many people live in these countries, what a large share of global GDP is created there, what high percentage of world high-tech and innovative products is exported from there, and also interstate zones of free trade have been formed within this region. So we, like regional chamber, also could be the participant in the harmonization of mutual national interests and strategies through an increase in the connectivity of the economic complexes of all the Asia-Pacific region countries. So that's why we strive to fill the partnership formula with actions at the regional level through investment projects, transport and infrastructure development, but also with innovative projects at the level of small and medium enterprises. Because I see a huge potential here, and this can be facilitated by the institution of the KC. where we meet, in fact, together on the same boat or bridge with no need to shout through the canyons to each other. So here together we can plan the future. And small and medium enterprises members of our chamber over the past 3-4 years have expanded their sales geography to 99 countries of the world, thanks to the active work of our chamber at the international level, the establishment of trust and aligned relations in economic terms with other chambers, especially CASI, as well as regional chambers. This happened because we managed to implement a project to create a center for export support, the first one private-public partnership project in Russian Federation, which finances small and medium enterprises for their exhibition participation, business missions, certification, product patenting, internet sites, business printed matter, and other services. And these are working practical tools, and now such centers are being established throughout Russia. Business has no borders is an impetus in the development of relations between the chambers as bearers of the principles of unrestricted economic cooperation. So in my conclusion, I would like to say that it's very important to exchange experience between the regional chambers of all countries to form a unified approach to investment practices, development processes, and the effects on nature and people, because the current situation shows us the fragility of our world. And to conclude finally my speech, I would like with a quotation from Mahatma Gandhi: "Find the goal, the resources will be found." And the everyday work of our chamber and other chambers with our customers, small and medium enterprises also hit by the pandemic, regularly confirms the same, because we, the chamber, have and offer the resources, labor, mental, judicial, financial, tax connection to perfect the present situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glosso. I think thanks for bringing that collaborative approach and the need to exchange more information, especially the investment projects, especially for SMEs and the trade possibilities. With this, now we come to the last speaker, last but not the least, Mr. Gurgur is the Chief Advisor to the President of the Union of Chambers and Commodity Exchanges of Turkey. Over to you, Mr. Gurgur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greetings from Ankara, Turkey. Accept my special thanks to CASI and FIKI for organizing this important conference. It's my great pleasure to speak to you on behalf of the TOBB, Turkish Union of Chambers. I would also like to thank all speakers for their valuable remarks and contributions. I think we all agree that the pandemic is likely to be with us for a while and its economic aftermath for a much longer time. Nowadays, all countries face a long ascent, a journey that will be difficult, uneven, uncertain, and prone to setbacks. COVID-19 will make the world economy 4.4% smaller this year. This is the worst global recession since the Great Depression, and over the next 5 years, this crisis could cost an estimated $28 trillion in output losses worldwide. It is also estimated that global merchandise trade will shrink around 9% this year. This is historically bad, in line with 2009 global financial crisis. And additionally, in the second quarter, global services trade was down 30% year-on-year. Humanity is in desperation in the face of huge disruption and rising poverty for the first time in decades. We face two massive tasks: to fight the crisis today and build a better tomorrow. And I think there are 3 lessons we have learned so far in dealing with the COVID-19. A durable economic recovery is only possible if we beat the pandemic everywhere. Therefore, we need strong international cooperation, especially on vaccine development and distribution. Second, we should continue support for workers and businesses until a durable exit from the health crisis. And third, we must invest more in people. It means using human and physical capital to underpin growth and resilience. There are also challenges and opportunities arising from the pandemic. It is now a moment of transformation to build a better future. There are already some good practices, for such transformation. Maybe the best example is from an Asia Pacific region country. New Zealand is a country in which competent government rely on science and expertise to make decisions. New Zealand government has managed to bring the disease under control and now is working to build the kind of economy that should mark the post-pandemic world, one that is greener and more knowledge-based. Therefore, I should mention that one possible outcome of the pandemic could be to accelerate the spread of new technologies, boosting productivity and growth. As the world works to defeat the pandemic, countries can transform their economies to be smarter, greener, and more inclusive. We could seize these opportunities through digitalization, green economy, and free trade. Digitalization has kept many firms going during the pandemic by allowing many employees to work from home. It has also allowed students to keep learning and households to receive lifeline support despite outbreaks and lockdowns. It also helped governments deliver key government services. Second, a greener recovery. Public investment, especially in green projects and digital infrastructure, can be a game changer. They have the potential to create millions of new jobs while boosting productivity and incomes. Just as the pandemic has shown that we can no longer ignore health precautions, we can no longer afford to ignore climate change. In the last decade, direct damage from climate-related disasters adds up to around 1.3 trillion US dollars. If you don't like the crisis, we will certainly not like the climate crisis. We can help our environment while also boosting the post-pandemic recovery. With the right mix of green infrastructure investment, higher carbon prices, and subsidies to renewable productions, we can steer toward zero emission by 2050. Therefore, we have an historic opportunity to build a greener world, also a more prosperous one. And third, we need a more fair and global trade architecture. We need to strengthen global international trade because the most important poverty reduction and development tool is trade. Trade can also support a more peaceful world. Several studies show that an increase in bilateral trade interdependence significantly promotes peace. They also suggest that the peace promotion effects of bilateral trade integration is significantly higher for contiguous countries that are likely to experience more conflict. More importantly, we see that not only bilateral trade but global trade openness also significantly promote peace. Therefore, increasing global trade openness will reduce the probability of conflicts. And greater cooperation at the World Trade Organization can diffuse trade tensions and provide greater certainty for international trade. And finally, we should deal with debt. Global public debt is projected to reach a record high of 1% of GDP in 2021. Addressing this issue over the medium term will be critical because for many low-income countries, urgent action is required. Public debt levels are going up significantly, especially for low-income countries. And given their heavy debt burdens, they are now struggling to maintain vital policy support. They need debt relief, and the world should provide a debt relief to poorest nations. To conclude, we are seeing a less dire contraction, but the global recovery will be long, uneven, and uncertain. Macro policy support must not be withdrawn before recovery has gained traction. And perhaps most important, policymakers will need to look beyond the immediate recovery and make sure that any measures implemented now also serve the longer-term need to help generate more inclusive, smarter, and greener growth in the future. Thank you, and I wish you all a healthy future.
Thank you, Mr. Gurgur. Thank you. I think with this, we come to the end of this session. We have had some great, I hope everyone agrees that we have some great suggestion from all the member organizations, whether it was on collaborative approach or new technologies, introducing new technologies, or having exchange of more information. I think the pandemic has taught us new ways of doing things. And with this, now may I now invite Mr. Samir Modi to present his vote of thanks for all the speakers. Over to you, Mr. Samir Modi.
I would say a very big thank you to FICCI, our hosting chamber, Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, for having us in the first virtual conference of CASI. I'd like to thank all our speakers for their valuable insights in the current topic. I'd also like to say to my dear friends, the speakers, that we missed you face to face. And I'm hoping that next year we will be able to meet face to face again to the 35th annual conference of CASI. I'd like to thank the FICCI Secretariat and the CASI Secretariat for putting together the agenda and this conference. It's been a challenge to put together the first virtual conference of CASI. With that, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all of you for joining us, all the speakers, all the viewers for being with us. And also, I'd like to say, stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully in Singapore for the 35th conference of CASI. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Samir.
Thank you, Samir Modi ji.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Imbat, good to see you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Stockel, and
Okay, bye.
Good to see you, Samir Bhai, too.